Hey, Nick, are you ready?
Always.
Hey, Nick, are you ready?
Hey, Angelette, ready.
Awesome. And hello to everyone out there who's tuning in for this episode of Be the Solution. If you don't already know, each time we meet, Nick and I discuss various bottom up solutions to barriers that many of us face. And we have these conversations alongside an array of guests that will join us, whether they come from the field of education or business or within our own communities. And speaking of guests, I can't wait to introduce you all to who we brought along with us today. If you are a Gen Xer like me who watched MTV in the early 90s, you'll probably recognize her from one of the most popular seasons of The Real World. And if you don't know what The Real World is, well, shame on you, but let's just say it's what really propelled reality television as we know it today. Now, this is the only hint I will give you for now, because before we get to talking, we are going to kick it off with our virtual version of Nick on the streets. So let's listen to some sound bites Nick gathered from some folks and their thoughts on the shifting dynamics of education. Let's roll.
Learning pods, aka pandemic pods or micro schools. Do you agree with them or disagree?
It allows a more intimate learning environment. And so therefore you get more contact with the instructor. Your voice is heard with regards to if you have questions or, problems working through, the coursework. And secondly, it promotes a lot more accountability because of the fact that everybody is able to track one another, hold one another accountable.
And I really believe that this is an equity issue, and I think that the people that are hiring teachers and setting up learning pods are doing so because they have the privilege to do so. And so when we find a workaround to these policies that are leaving certain communities historically disadvantaged and we're not fixing the system, I see that as something that is not going to get to the heart of these policies that were never designed to make sure that every family and every child gets the start that they need. So, in that essence, I disagree, but I do agree that families are in a crisis and they're scared and they're bringing in a teacher. But in the same way, it's that issue of privilege and the haves and the have-nots, because the families that are struggling to just find Wi-Fi, to drive their kids to the Taco Bell to get online, they are not going to have that opportunity. It's not something within their reach. So again, it's just, to me, something that is putting a Band-Aid on some systemic issues that need to be resolved.
I do teach lots of pods, but I'm teaching them online in California, and I'm teaching high school kids biology, some AP biology, some AP statistics. I'm teaching English in Africa and one of the regional languages in India and Nepal. So I've been seeing there's balance of both the points that Eric mentioned and what Christina has shared, because people in developing countries who are not privileged to have even Wi-Fi or even a computer that is so rampant in our country. And so for those people, it's difficult to kind of access those resources. And if we look at the overall impact of micropods, I think it's really good, because if the kid is able to join a pod and they are learning, the efficiency of learning is way more than an old school classroom learning.
I believe that in the bigger picture, the school system that we've known in the United States is falling apart, and that's a good thing. And so I believe it'll look messy for a while, but we're coming to realize that doing it differently is, we have to reinvent what we've been doing.
How do you define equity in education, and where do learning pods fit into that?
Because I'm not familiar with the learning pod concept or like how they're starting, it almost sounds very grassroots to me. It sounds like homeschool co-ops is something that we've also called them, where like people are coming together and educating their children. Well, I don't see the diversity happening in these pods like you would have in the classroom, which then I think takes away from the educational process, because it's also about socialization, and you're going to end up with birds of a feather flocking together in these pods.
What do you think is the solution moving forward for education post-pandemic?
There's going to be a lot of change, and there's going to be a lot of pain. There's going to be people holding on to an old system that's broken, that we don't really like, but it's comfortable. There's going to be people trying to get creative and use what they have, think outside of the box.
We need to foster that creativity. So therefore, we need to grant people the creativity to experiment, because of the fact that you never know where that next really cool idea that's going to build a more robust system is going to come from. Another part of that solution is decentralization. I think if we decentralize a previously broken down system that was more and more centralized, I think that's a positive thing, positive move forward.
I mean, it is a system that needs to be dismantled, but what COVID is, the divide and the inequities that we are seeing, they were always there.
I believe in community, multi-age level, project-based learning. I'm currently working with another educator right now in building that idea here in St. Petersburg, Florida.
With COVID, when the government shut everything down, I think we need to realize that we need to have an alternative to do for ourselves and not always depend on the government.
So keep being the solution. Remember, you're the answer, and criticize by creating.
This was great, Nick. I love the diversity of the views you got from these folks. Was there anything here that surprised you, or would you like to summarize for us?
People are afraid to try things, and there's a lot of shame around it because of the equity conversations we're having. And there's two camps that have emerged. There's top down, and people who are saying there's some serious systemic issues that are affecting our educational system today, and the bottom up camp, who is saying we've got to be the solution. And I thought it was very interesting. There's a whole lot of baggage mixed up in this conversation that is coming to people from their friends, from their neighbors, maybe even from their family, as they're seeing their kids on a Zoom call 9 to 5, and they're in kindergarten, and maybe that's not working for them. And they're trying to think of something to do, but they might have some shame around that because they feel like they're contributing to this inequity or widening the educational gap. And so they're kind of trapped in the belly of the beast here and don't know how to get out. That was the theme that I got. And the question of, well, what's good for the learners paralleled the question, what's good for the teachers, paralleled what's good for the parents. There's a lot of stakeholders at play as well. And it really opened my eyes to all of the different factors that are playing a role in this that I never thought about.
That's awesome. Well, this is why I reached out to our special guest for today, because when I knew we would be, talking about how COVID has shifted the way we approach education, I thought, who would be best to talk about the educational impact other than a mother of 9 children? Like, imagine a mother of 9 in the middle of a pandemic in rural America who's got to log in all her children into Zoom calls, or would it be a pandemic pod for her? I don't know, but regardless, I bet she would agree that all 9 of her beautiful children are uniquely different in their learning capabilities. But in addition, she, like I said, she's an experienced parent, but she's also an author, a blogger, a public policy pundit. Oh my gosh, what else does she do? She does a lot of things. She's also a television personality, appearing as a frequent guest host on ABC's The View or Fox News Outnumbered. She's also has her own show on Fox Nation called Moms. And she continues to this day as a Fox News contributor. So without further ado, here's Rachel Campos-Duffy. So welcome, Rachel. Let's bring her up on the screen.
Thanks for having me on. I'm so excited. What a great and important topic for parents right now. I know everybody's talking about, politics these days, but parents are talking about education. And I think it's what's really consuming them, especially as we, enter the month of September here. And so many of us are facing different scenarios, really. I mean, some people have access to school and some parents, don't. And I thought that the video that you played was fantastic because it shows the range of situations out there and the different ways that parents think about solutions for their kids.
Yeah. So what are one or two immediate thoughts that came to your mind when you heard some of the people's responses to Nick's questions? Anything that struck a chord to you?
So, well, Nick talked about this equity issue, which is interesting because it brings up, financial inequities, right? But there's also regional inequities. So, the idea of putting together a pod or some sort of co-op or even hiring a private tutor, whatever it is, for someone who lives where I live, which is a small town in sort of central Wisconsin, I don't have those options. And I'm sure there's lots of rural moms, it's not a financial problem sometimes for them. It's just the matter that you don't have access to those kinds of resources. So I thought about the geographical issues for some parents, depending on where they live. I love the creativity. I like the idea that this pandemic has this silver lining and that we're starting to rethink the way things have always been done, because it's clear that our education system is broken, that it isn't working, that no matter how much money we pour into it, there are other countries that are, surpassing us, and that has, global and, ramifications for our country and where our standing is in the world and for our kids' future. So we really do need to rethink things. And the other thing I thought a lot about is curiosity, because nothing is more important. All rote memory stuff doesn't matter. Facts don't. If you can get your kid to actually be curious and excited about education and about learning, that's really the battle, and that's really where success happens. And being in a pandemic situation where maybe your public school is shut down, and your kids are learning virtually, that can appear to be a negative, right? Because your kid's in front of a computer and there's not a lot of, interaction. There's not a lot of, field trips and things like that. However, it could also mean that you can add things to your child's education that maybe you wouldn't be able to do if they were in the traditional school setting. So you can actually customize it and make things work for your kid, because no one knows what your kid likes and how your child learns better than you do. So so many things were popping into my head as I was watching that.
Awesome.
It sounds like you're speaking from experience.
Yeah.
Tell me, have you had any schools closed down for any of your 9 kids, and what did you do?
So my situation is very interesting. So I have college kids who are learning partially in class and partially virtually. One of them is a freshman. So my heart was really breaking for him. I think he just didn't get that traditional experience in a lot of ways that that kids are so excited to experience in the freshman year. So I think that was a little bit difficult. For the rest of them that are in high school and junior high and elementary school, some of them were at the public school and some of them were at Catholic school, because I'm all about choice, and public school was working great for some of my kids and Catholic school was working great for others. However, our public school is all virtual. And after the few months that my children had at home at the end of the last school year, it was just overwhelmingly, they did not enjoy virtual learning. Clearly, I was a newbie at it. I might be the world's worst homeschool mom, possibly. It could be. I was not good at it. It didn't meet my strengths. We were unprepared. And I think as you talked about as well, I mean, some of the teachers also weren't prepared for that. So there are some school districts that were very experienced in virtual learning, and there are some states that are better at it. Our school system was not very good at it. And so the combination was terrible. So I actually offered my kids, I'm like, let's find a nice warm, we live in Wisconsin. So I'm like, maybe we should find a warm location if we're going to, and do virtual from there. And my kids just said, I don't care what the weather is. I don't want to do virtual anymore. And they wanted in school. So they are in Catholic school, but there are
So how many kids did you have at home trying to do school through Zoom?
I had all of them. So other than the 4-year-old and the baby who didn't need it, everyone was home. And it was complicated, you know, because the Zoom call bandwidth space wasn't just for them. I had to do my job. My husband had his job. So it was very complicated figuring out, you know, what everyone was doing. And I have to say, I just felt like the last 2 months were a bit of a waste of our time. And we were definitely moving into the new school year going, we do not want our kids to fall behind. And like so many other parents, just trying to figure out what was best. And for my kids, it was to go in-person learning at the Catholic school.
A lot of conversation about public schools, but I know private schools and Catholic schools also weren't well equipped during the transition in the spring. And I know we talked about this before jumping on to this podcast. Was I even thought about taking my kids out of private school and putting them into an online virtual school that's been around for 20 years, because I thought they were probably more equipped at teaching them online versus even the private school. So I'm glad at the last minute things changed.
Mm-hmm. I had the same thought. And then of course your school also decided to do in person, right, Angela?
Yes. Yep. In the last few weeks, they just started school yesterday. And, you know, over here in the state of Maryland, there was a lot of controversy about not having the private schools open. So
we had that here too.
Yeah. So, and that came into play of the word equity came into play with that as a decision and the reason for them to not open the private schools. So let's talk a little bit about equity. Nick, do you have any questions?
So when we talk to people, and I talk to many people outside of the interviews that you saw in the video earlier too, there seems like there's two issues going on with the equity part of education in a pandemic. One is like, are we crabs in a bucket, right? And as soon as somebody tries to crawl out of the situation that's not working, we're pulling them back in, right? Or is it that people are just selfish or putting a Band-Aid on a systemic issue and saying, well, I'm just going to look out for me and mine and say, forget about the rest of the population that's dependent on the public educational system. So those were kind of the two camps. Yeah. And they were strong arguments for and against them. So I don't know, like, so when you have obviously had to pivot, I don't know what you had 9 laptops going and business grade internet, or I don't know how you did it, but like, did you catch any flack when you tried to pivot and like away from the mainstream solution or way of doing it? Did you get any blame or criticism?
No, and I think that as a parent, especially a parent with a lot of kids, I think it's really hard. I think it would be overwhelming for me to think about systemic problems, right? I feel like my job as a parent, I'm the first most important teacher, most formative teacher in their life. And I take that job very seriously. So I have to look at just my family and what works for my family. And did I talk with mom friends? Yes. And I've been surprised at some of the choices other mom friends have taken. What I think is interesting about this pandemic situation is that we're starting to see, it forced us to look out for our own a little bit in a way, like, right, we all got in this protective mode. How do I take care of my particular family? And I think that's good. I think if every family is looking out for what works for their family, we're gonna start to see what actually works, right? I know I was frustrated at the very beginning of the pandemic, my sister lives kind of in the area you live, Angelette. My sister lives in Northern Virginia, and there was a call. There was hardly any resistance to the idea of shutting down schools, but those were wealthy parents who could figure out these other situations. So I was frustrated by that, because I was going, well, what about all these people who can't afford to do it, to have a tutor or set up a pod, or people like me who didn't even have the option of a micro school. So if my private school didn't open and my public school was closed, I was going to be stuck, doing what I had to do in March and April and May, which was basically, I failed my kids. I wasn't able to do it. So I don't think it's bad for parents to look at their own situation and do what's best for them. And maybe the solutions will come out of that. I think all of us have been thinking that this traditional way of doing school, we've just all kind of been on that, I don't know, the hamster wheel. We're just kind of going through the motions. We're going to our jobs, our kids go to school. And now suddenly we're thinking, well, wait a minute, because our school's shutting down, what are all the other options? And maybe these options were better in the first place. So I'm excited about all the moms that I know who are homeschooling. I'm excited about the people in other places that are able to have these micro pods or whatever they're calling them, or bring in a tutor or in some way customize their child's education. I think the most important thing that should come out of this is that we all, A, get in the driver's seat, and B, that the government frees up the money so that everyone has access to those choices, right? So that the money follows the child. And then I think we're really gonna see some amazing innovations.
What do we say to all the teachers then who are like, oh my gosh, if the money follows the kids, then we're all just going to lose our jobs? You know what I mean? This is a big...
Will they? I mean, maybe there's a public school teacher who would rather teach in a micro school, and maybe they'd get paid better. Who knows? Maybe there's Catholic school parents, teachers who feel the same way. I don't know. I mean, that's the whole thing. It is kind of an unknown, and it's a little bit scary. But when you look at what the outcomes were, how American students are ranking in math and reading, I mean, I'm almost at the point, like, what do we have to lose?
So without sounding too political, who would you say is at fault for the lack of equity in education? Did parents cause this inequity because of creating pandemic pods or trying to pull their kids out of school and homeschool? Or did inequity always exist and COVID has just brought it to the spotlight?
That it's the second, 100%. So, many of the people who have been the biggest proponents of opposing school choice and vouchers and this idea of allowing the tax dollars that are going to your child's education to follow them to the school that best suits them. Those people who are opposed to parental choice are often the same people who send their own kids to private schools. And we saw that in the Obama administration. Obama shut down the voucher program in DC, which for many families was a lifeline, not just because the education in DC was so poor at the public schools, but there was actually safety and gang issues that parents were trying to escape and were unable to. And so I think what this pandemic did, again, many of the people that were proposing, were 100% behind closing schools. Many of those parents also were parents that had other options financially and geographically. Maybe they were from rich suburbs. So I think that equity was always an issue. I think that definitely the pandemic exposed it. And I think this idea of shaming is really interesting. Until I saw the video and listened to Nick talk about it, I never really thought about it, but it is true that it's there. And we really, as individuals, have to overcome that. There is nothing wrong with wanting the absolute best thing for your child. No one else is going to care about your kid the way you do. That's just human nature. And so you better get in the driver's seat and you better look out for what's best for your child. So whether, you're in an inner city or a rural area, or whether you are blessed to, live somewhere where you're, able to afford and have access to lots of options, you shouldn't feel bad for taking advantage of that. Obviously, we should all work towards making sure that in terms of policy, we can extend that opportunity to everybody. I just think school choice ought to be a nonpartisan issue. School choice is the American dream. School choice is a human right.
I did a podcast recently where a gentleman said something that stuck with me. He said, people who are hurt want to hurt others, but people who are healed want to heal others. And I thought about it in the context of doing these interviews with people, because it seems like there's a lot of people carrying a lot of fear and shame around this, but why are we doing it? Is it that we're just ashamed and so we're just shaming others? If I can't do it, you can't do it, crabs in a bucket? Or is there something else going on? I'm asking you because you're a mother of 9 and obviously have been dealing with the educational disruptions a lot more than me. My 2 kids aren't even of school age yet.
School age. I think it's interesting. I think you see that that's kind of somewhat of human nature, right? I do think that because there was politics behind it. So again, it's one thing to say, I'm in favor of shutting down schools, and yet I have resources to get around that, right? And then people going, I want my school to open. I can't work or feed my kids unless the school opens. And then you also had, interestingly, parents like me. I have a child with special needs with Down syndrome. And so there were a lot of parents with, autistic children or, again, Down syndrome or other special needs. Most of those services they get through the school. And so the regression that they were experiencing was far more than the average student. They were losing, in 3, 4, 5 months, a year and a half of progress. So that was a whole other frustration. And so I think some people were like, yeah, easy for you to say to shut down and seem, like you're, super progressive and politically correct and you're trying to protect everybody, but you have the geographical advantage and the financial advantage to work around this. Other people were going to suffer. At the same time, I look at what, the video you showed shows me that this disruption is also forcing parents across all socioeconomic backgrounds to be really innovative. And I think the most important thing is that they're beginning to rethink the whole idea of education and put themselves as parents into the driver's seat. That's what's important, is empowering parents to see themselves as the number one advocate for their child. And again, it's very overwhelming as a parent to think that you have to take care of this, systemic, national problem of, inadequate schools. All I can do when I get up in the morning is go, how am I going to make sure my kid or my kids are getting the best education they can? And I think if every parent started to get in the driver's seat and do what's best for their kid, without barriers from government, without barriers from, as you said, social shaming or anything else, and just do what's right for your family, we'll all do better because we'll start to see what actually works. And that's what's exciting about this period of disruption in education. And I believe that more and more parents, because they had, because of the experience of seeing what their kids were being taught, because they're being forced to find new solutions, and because government can't control a lot of what's happening right now, I think that we're going to see innovation, and we're going to see a whole mindset change in terms of allowing parents to manage their kids' education and allowing the tax dollars to follow the child.
Great. Can I ask you, what's at risk? What's at risk if we fail?
The risk, I mean, it's what I don't think we have anything to lose. I think if you look at the educational outcomes, America versus the rest of the world, we're already failing. We're throwing more money than, some countries spend on a child in 3 years, you know what I mean? On one child. So money is not the answer. And that's the only answer government ever has to education problems. What we need is innovation. What we need is people figuring out what works and trying new things. And so, yeah, I think that there's not a lot to lose. Sadly, there's not a lot to lose.
I have to agree with her. I'm ready to start like a movement here of parents and education. I'm ready.
All right.
Nick, do you have anything else or any closing remarks? Because you're great at closing.
He's the closer.
We're more divided today than we've ever been. And this issue is no exception. I think that it's good and we need to talk about it. And I hope that people who are listening to this will get some ideas, go out and have some conversations, and start trying some things. Most of the criticism and the blaming and the disagreement that we're experiencing today is not about what you are going to walk out the door and do to make the world a better place or to improve your kids' lives. It's about what the president is going to make everybody do or how we should use all of our tax dollars. We argue about top-down solutions. Why is it not enough that we just change our own world and inspire others who pass through our world? Why is it that we have to be out trying to, tackle global hunger or change the world? This change the world-ism is very suspicious to me because I think it's very disempowering. And it can lead to top-down thinking and problem solving that ultimately can discredit or even blind people to the things that we can do every single day to make a difference. Instead of talking about Medicare, why not go take care of your grandparents? How are they doing? There are countries that are built around multi-generational living. We're blind to the things around us every single day that we could do if we're focused on changing the world, which oftentimes is an abstraction and leaves people feeling hopeless, powerless, and ultimately meaningless, when I think the most opportunity for meaning and purpose exists right here, right now, in the fabric of this moment, and we just don't recognize it. Rachel, I really thank you for coming on and sharing all of your insights and your wisdom and your passion with other parents just like yourself who are trying to figure out this whole disrupted education thing and look at the different possibilities that are out there beyond the false choices that we're being presented with. So I really appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really believe that power starts in the family and in the home. And I think this podcast really emphasizes that and really puts that front and center. And I think it's really empowering for parents, especially in this moment.
Yeah. Again, I want to thank you, Rachel, so much for your inspiring insight. And I hope it inspires some of you, the listeners out there today. And as a matter of fact, we like to hear from you and what you all have to say. We are starting a social media challenge using the hashtag Be the Solution. And we're challenging you to share with us and the world what is one innovative bottom-up solution you are doing or even heard about. For example, if you're also participating in a learning pod, or if you heard about a local distillery that's making hand sanitizer, or an individual that's helping to serve the needs of others. So once you share this story on social media, challenge your friends to tell their stories too. And if not, at least what you can do is to share this episode with your entire network of friends. Again, use the hashtag Be the Solution. You never know, because we may just share it right here, or better yet, we may invite you into the conversation. So Rachel, are you ready? Because I nominate you to be the first to participate in our Be the Solution challenge.
I am. I'm going to participate.
Awesome. So awesome. So until next time, go out there, be the solution, and stop criticizing and start creating. Thank you guys so much for tuning in.
Mic drop. Great.